my name is Jenna, but you guys can call me Jen, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to a little discussion-y video. I decided this week that because I didn't have anything like super planned in my schedule, I would open it up to Instagram and ask you guys what you wanted to see from me, and I gave you a couple options, but writing and discussion popped off much more than anything else. So today we're going to talk about writing. Specifically, let's talk about story structure. Sort of. And and we're gonna see where this discussion goes from there, because I have nothing planned except for that. Recently, I sat down with Amy Prokopis for a chat for her channel. I will let you guys know when all the details go up about our chat, but I was so excited to be picked for that. But our discussion was absolutely fantastic. We had such a great time nitpicking like our writing lives and discussing all that kind of stuff. But what we got really into, which I really liked, bringing up this idea, was like story structure, and then like whether you are an outliner or what we call a plotter or a panster or somewhere in between. What that got me thinking of was how much that I myself as a writer have evolved from since when I started writing as a young kid. So we're gonna kind of go down memory lane today and we're gonna chat about my life and my writing life. Also, I will apologize at the beginning of this video if you hear any weird noises. I currently have both my air going and my dishwasher going, and my air and my dishwasher are the two loudest appliances known to man. So I do apologize if you can hear any weird gurgling or anything going on in the background. That is what is happening around me. I am now, as I sit, 24 years old, almost 25. I am a plotter. I cannot start writing a story without knowing my roadmap first. I always like to say that I cannot start writing until I have an ending, because that is so true. My ending is like my clinch piece. If I have like a vague sense of what like this late second act into the third act is gonna look like, but I have a final image, I will start writing. Because I always find that that like second half of the story is a little bit more vague when I'm planning things out until I actually start getting into the writing spiel. But I need to know where I want my characters to end up at the end of the story, where their relationships are, where that last final image is, where we're gonna see these characters as we leave the story. I need to know that before I can actually start writing. So that is what I'm like today. Whether or not I use the Save the Cat beat sheet system, which is what I did for a long time, or whether I just kind of brainstorm scene ideas and put them in order and just hope for the best, which is kind of what I'm doing now. I love outlining. I love it. I love planning my story. I love having that roadmap, whether it's scene by scene or beat by beat, doesn't matter. I love having a roadmap of telling me where I'm going with my story, which is very fun and is a way that I beat the quote-unquote writer's block. I actually had a question come through with the Instagram posts that I was putting up, and the question was literally just tips on dealing with writer's block. How do I write so fast? And I think that's one of my things, is having that outline, knowing my end goal so that I know where I'm going and I know what I have to write next. Because a lot of the times when I was growing up and I was just plotting on vibes and writing on vibes, I would get into these instances where I just didn't know what to do next, and I would just kind of meander a little bit and I would lose my steam with writing. I still do. A lot of my projects that I'm working on currently are very, very, very large, especially Project Dragon right now. So because of that, those stories I can get bogged down in and lose a little bit of the inspiration. That's another thing that I find that really helps with a story. If a story is just bothering the hell out of you and you need to get it down, I thrive on like letting that need build as much as I can until I get to the planning stage where I can hash out an entire plot and know my ending, and then I can write. Which is why in cases like with Project Second Story, and previously when I was writing Project Dream for the very first time, I wrote that one in 17 days, and I wrote Project Second Story in 25 days. So, and that's just to say, those are just first drafts. But the story itself exploded out of me because I was so excited to write the story, and I knew what the story was, or at least the bones of it. I didn't, you know, have the voice or whatever, but the bones of it were there. I knew where I had to go, and that usually helps me avoid Writer's block. I also have this thought in my head that writer's block depends on the person. So a lot of people I know find writer's block because they either lose inspiration or they don't know where to go next, which are my two biggest things that I like to defeat in various ways, as I just said. But another big thing with my writer's block is if I find that the words aren't writing, and the words aren't writing and they're not flowing as well, usually that means something is wrong. And so it's either wrong with me emotionally or mentally, so I need a break, which is totally fine. I usually take a couple days off and then come back to it and with a fresh brain and everything's great. Or something went wrong in the story and I need to go back to where it was going very right and figure out what was wrong. And usually that fixes my writing block. I've never had the quote-unquote true writing block because that's just not how my brain works. And I know for people who are neurodivergent or just generally have other things going on, writing and writer's block is a very real thing. For me, it's not. So usually there's a fix and it's usually a pretty easy fix in my case. So do hope that answers that question. But we're gonna dive back into my writing journey as a human being. So back when I was 6, 7 years old, my mom had a PC computer up in the guest room. It was the family computer. I went up there every once in a while to do what a 6-year-old does on computers, which is, mess around on Club Penguin, or I don't think I was doing Club Penguin at age 6, but mess around on Paint, or I did write stories. So I ended up starting a story when I was that young about my dog Rudy. At the time, he was this adorable little bichon frisé and he grew up with me. I got him when I was in kindergarten. So I had and he grew up with me to high school. It was very, very good. I love him. But at that age, I started writing the story A Puppy Named Rudy. And back then I wrote exclusively on vibes. Whatever came to mind, vibes, which is, and it worked. It kind of carried me through until I was a preteen teenager. And I remember when I got to that point, and I never finished A Puppy Named Rudy, of course. It was, an unfinished draft, an unfinished story. And I don't believe I have that file anymore because I think it got transferred into my mom's Mac computer when we switched over to Mac. And then mom had an accident one time when I was 11 or 12. And I remember her falling with her computer and it just absolutely breaking everything and crashing the motherboard. And it was this whole thing. So I don't think we have the file anymore because a lot of those old files were destroyed and lost. So sad. I would love to be able to read those stories, read them for you guys. But baby Jenna, writing on vibes. When I got to about age 12, 13, 14, I was one of the people who ran my community center snack area. And when I was doing those really long summer days and no one would come into the community center, obviously it would be one off every hour to get a Slurpee or some candy or something. I ended up bringing stuff with me, and I at the time had a notebook that I brought with me everywhere, and in my head, I was plotting a story. I was not. I was just world building. I was just creating, which was great because it allowed me to realize after all these years, I get bogged down in the details so easily, and I was like that as a kid too. So I had this entire notebook just full of a world. I still have that notebook, I think. I think it's at home. I should go dig out all my old writing stuff one day and share it with you guys, but because I was a notebook bitch. Still am. That notebook was filled with a world that I never wrote a single word for. I didn't have a story there. I barely even had characters. It was just a world that I loved, and I loved exploring and detailing the stuff about it. So that's kind of where my world started about building worlds. When I was a teenager, I never thought I would ever be able to write fantasy because in my head, fantasy, you had to have an incredible imagination to come up with all this stuff. And you do. You really do. But look at me now. I wrote exclusively YA contemporary at the time. My very first draft that I hit the end on was in grade 12, I think, or the summer before grade 12. Around that time, I was 17. And that feeling of reaching the end of a draft and being oh, I've done it? This is actually a possibility. I know I can do this now. Felt like I was opening a door to an entirely new universe. That draft that I wrote, story that I wrote actually, was called 3 Little Words, and it was based off of Sarah Dessen's books because I love Sarah Dessen, but it was mainly based off of Just Listen, which is my favorite Sarah Dessen. Oh my god, I forgot I did that. Sometimes when you open up old books of yours, you are surprised by your past self. Oh man, I forgot that my characters' names were Lily and Calvin. Oh my god. As proof, I wrote a little bit of a scene. This is what I do when I read bits and books now. Even I will sit and write, even if I have like from inspiration in a story, I will sit and write the scene that I have in my brain on page. And I do that in the back of the book. Oh, that's so funny. It's in pencil too, so it's gonna fade one day, but I'm surprised it hasn't faded already. Anyways, yeah, that was my that was my story at age 17, I guess. But from there, I have evolved an incredible amount because I used to be a pantser and I just let the story do whatever it wanted and tell me how it wanted to go. And I think that was to my detriment as a young writer because I obviously barely finished anything I started. There was so many started projects where I had like 3 chapters of stuff, 10,000 words of stuff before I just gave up and ended it. It wasn't like a story that had anything more than a couple opening scenes. I think though it was detrimental to me to be that kind of a writer and not have really any kind of place to go with a format and a structure, I needed that to become what I am now. So now I am super rigid plotter, right? I need an ending to start writing. But that didn't really start until I discovered how story writing works for me. And I'm still discovering that to this day because story writing is such a incredible process and there's no right way to do anything, right? When I was first writing Project Dark, which is a YA fantasy that I started in the first year of university, so back in 2015, right after I had finished my YA contemporary and tried to work on it for a few months, but I didn't really get anywhere with it. Project Dark was a 6-year project that I worked on, from building the world to building the story to having the characters to rewriting it multiple times, ripping apart the plot, re-going, whatever, what have you, all that kind of stuff. And I think that was me as a writer coming from the background of being a pantser, just like letting the story go do what it wanted, because I remember many days sitting in my parents' RV writing and just being so surprised at what the characters were doing because the characters had a mind of their own and they were just going off on this adventure without me, and I was like, oh, all right, let's go. And it took me so long to get these stories down and done because I was just letting them do what they wanted. And that's also kind of why all my drafts ended up being 120,000 words or more. I'm such an overwriter because at the time I let myself do whatever I wanted with the story, and that has kind of lingered a little bit now because I do tend to overwrite my scenes and need to always edit them down. From that first few drafts of Project Dark, I got used to plotting and realizing what was wrong with the story and where things were sagging, and I got better at writing because I was actively writing and changing things. I have since shelved Project Dark. It is still a story that and I love my characters so deeply that I will probably one day unearth and try and see if I can make it good, because it wasn't good. It wasn't good. It is a story that I still keep really close to my heart, and mainly the characters. The characters have been ripped from their worlds and their stories multiple times and put back in new places, but they've always been the same characters. So that story really grounded me in my writing. And then I wrote Project Dream. Project Dream was the first story that I really plotted from top to bottom using the Save the Cat method. And I wrote it in 17 days. I wrote it for Camp Nano back in, was it 2020 or was it 2021? I think it was 2020. It was a story that it needed to get out of me, and it did. And I'm so glad it did, because it not only taught me so much about writing middle grade, and it has not only taught me so much about continuing my exploration of writing structure, but realizing how easy it can be when I have myself created everything I need to be able to write the story. Now, this is only for me. You don't have to write like this. Trust me, you don't. So many people in this world don't do this. But I need to know everything from characters to their motivation to the worlds to the magic to the plot to the ending. I need to know it all before I can actively tell myself the story for the first draft. And then once that's done, I go back and I change and I fix and I build and I, go from there. But from that extremely rigid plotting system, I have now relaxed a little bit, and I think this is kind of where I'm gonna end up sitting for a while now with my story structure and my writing journey from here on out. I've done it now with Project Dragon and with Project Second Story, but I was chatting with my lovely friend Hannah Long because I follow her. She's the author of Hollow Smoke and Temple of No God. I follow her on Instagram because she's a Canadian author and I really adore her work and I just adore her as a person. She's absolutely amazing. But I was chatting with her one day because I was astonished at how many stories she has written and how many that she works on in a year, and now that she's a published author, how that's changed. So chatting with her about her actual organizational plotting method was so eye-opening to me, because she told me that she was a pantser originally. She is a pantser at heart, and she lets her stories tell themselves, which to me freaks me out because I can't do that. I need an ending. That's the way my brain works. But because she's now in traditional publishing and works on deadlines, sometimes letting the story tell itself doesn't work, right? Because sometimes you get lost in the details and you get lost in the forest and have to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And not just in the editing sense, in the entire story sense. So with her and the way that she plots things out, she actually put it on Instagram and for everyone, not just me, to detail her outlining method that she uses as a pantser at heart. She does something in Scrivener that I now try and emulate. It's more of a loose brainstormy situation where she has 3 folders for the 3 acts in a, which is a very Western storytelling structure that we are all very familiar with, the 3-act structure. She has her 3 folders for that, and then she puts, depending on how long she wants the book to be, 11 cue cards in each thing, or 15 or however many originally, and then from there she plots using the cue cards in Scrivener and puts anything from a brief sentence to a scene to a description. She puts the main scenes that she wants, and whether or not those become multiple chapters in the end, that's just how she does it for each part, so that each part is relatively balanced. And when she explained that, I was mind blown. I was like, what do you mean? It doesn't have to be super rigid? What? And then I was like, I'm gonna try that for Project Dragon, because at the time Project Dragon had been locked in me. I have been working on Project Dragon for over a year now, and I've only been writing it for a couple months now. I think it's been 6 months since the beginning of this year when it unlocked in me. And it was pretty much because of that plotting system, that outlining system that Hannah explained. And it was also because of my friends, because we have a writing group that we work with, pieces of writing on. Those two combined, that just made my brain go galaxy brain, and I could see the whole story finally and how it all came together. And I just brainstormed so many scenes, just bit by bit by bit by bit for each character that the point of view is in. And then after that, I put that into Scrivener, into the little cue cards, and it just works so well. It works so well, and I think it's a very organic way of letting the story tell itself, because I was finding with Save the Cat, though Save the Cat is very intuitive and it has a wonderful plot structure and all that kind of stuff, and it has all the beats that you need in a story, sometimes your story doesn't fit in those beats exactly how they are in that sheet, right? And so that was some of the things that bothered me a little bit, because as I was trying to write a story or trying to plot a story out, sometimes the story didn't fit into those beats very well, and I was like, well, then there's something wrong with my story. No, you can write a story however you want it to. Those beats are just vague placeholders to help you get the action points of the story and to work that way. I'm still working obviously on Project Dragon. I have not completed a first draft yet, and it's going to be a monster of a draft because it's 3 points of view, it is high fantasy, and I am in the weeds of it still. I'm still in the beginning of it, really. And I've taken the idea of Hannah's organizational system, and instead of doing 3 parts for the cue card thing, instead of doing 3 parts, I've done folders for each character point of view, and then I've done the cue cards within that character point of view, enough that I can get my main scenes down and how I want the story to go and how I want it to unfold. So that's kind of what I've been working with for Project Dragon. Recently, if you guys are new to my channel or anything, I did a challenge in June where I tried to write a 70,000 word novel in 30 days. I ended up writing a 60,000 word novel in 25 days because I overestimated the amount of words that I was going to need for the story, but I ended up writing an entire novel in 25 days. And I used Hannah's method for it, sort of. I didn't break it into parts. I had a 4 or 5 page plot summary that had spilled out of me one day, and it was after I had read Legends and Lattes. Actually, it was literally like the next day. I woke up and I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I sat down and I wrote page by page, start to finish, the story of my boys, very vaguely, you know, how they got there, what that kind of stuff and whatever. And then before I started my challenge, I went back in, set up my Scrivener, and then I plotted scene by scene by scene by scene by scene what was gonna happen, what needed to go down, and then I put that in those little cue cards in Scrivener. And when I started, it was like a breath of fresh air, because I was like, I know what I need to write. I know the story. I know my characters sort of well enough to start this first draft, and I know where I need to end up, and I know what vibe I want, so I just started and I kept going for 25 days. I had a couple breaks in between, which is reminiscent to my previous point when I was talking about writer's block. It came to a point where I noticed that the words weren't coming as easy, and instead of forcing myself to get the words down, I allowed myself a day of a break. I think really what all of this long discussion has come to show me is that, and like also just kind of witnessing other authors and their kind of vibes and styles, is seeing them, especially like with authors like Hannah and talking with Amy as well, as writers. And really, like, the one piece of writing advice that never fails to be exactly what you need, and is the only like true piece of writing advice, one of the only bits that you should listen to, is that you need to keep writing to get better at writing. And that is so true, because at the age of 6, I was terrible at writing. I didn't finish a story. I didn't know how to properly frame sentences and all that kind of stuff. So throughout school, that's what I learned. And then when I was doing that weird world building notebook thing in the middle of summer when I was running my canteen, that was another lesson that I needed to learn about world building and letting myself not get bogged down in details. And since then, I've taken like Brandon Sanderson's web class about his world building and what he does and what actually is relevant to your story, thus like doing these world building exercises and creating my world and running D&D campaigns in it, and just getting really comfortable with the stories that I want to tell in my world has helped immensely, because I have a map and I know the places. I don't know anything about everything, right? I know enough about what I need to know to write my stories. So that was my world building thing. And then realizing my plot thing and like getting to the point of where I am as a plotter and understanding story structure through the writing of Project Dark as many times as I did, and then studying Save the Cat and like seeing all these different, you know, story structures and outlining methods and all that kind of stuff. And now where I am is so neat. Like, we're always evolving as writers, which I think is so totally cool. What was the point to this? I don't really know. These are my opinions and my observations of being in the writing world for so long, and they are my observations about myself and how I've transformed and grown as a writer. I now know my methods, sort of, because it changes with every book. It starts with a nest egg of an idea that I like to write down, because I have a terrible memory and it will vanish otherwise. So I write down the idea, whether that is in my notes app or I have a Scrivener file on my computer. I leave them, because if they are important enough, they will sit in my brain and percolate and percolate and percolate until they don't let me rest. And I have to write it. I know very well what needs to sit in the story and what needs to like percolate until it starts to needle me too much and I actually need to start figuring stuff out. From there, I start brainstorming. That's where the world creation will come in, and that's where like the character creation will come in, and names and scenes will start popping into my mind, or I'll get random inspiration at 1 a.m. and I'll have to write in my notes app all of this random stuff, and that's where you start to decode the story. So I go from the brainstorming stage, I go into the organization or like outlining stage, which is where I do either Save the Cat beat sheet and I like fill it in and make sure I have an ending, or I go to the Scrivener like cue card thing where I fill it all in and I know my ending as well. And then I write. And then I write and write and write and write and write and write, edit and edit and edit. But I think that's another discussion for another day, because I don't have as much experience being in the editing world and like the finishing a story world as I do with everything before that. Because with Project Dream, I'm currently in the querying world with that, trying to find a literary agent so that I can traditionally publish that one and get that into the hands of kids. I know that the amount of work that I've done on Project Dream is not done, right? Like, it's never going to be done until it's done, and signed off and sent to the publisher because I don't have a literary agent. I've done as much work on it as I can up to this point, and so I know it's not the final draft, which is kind of wild to think about because in my head it feels final and it feels like it's good enough. Now with Project Second Story, I have one draft done of it, and I'm going to start the second draft in August when I have all my beta reader feedback back, and that's when I'm going to really kind of start the editing of that one. And it's going to give me more data as to how I work as an editor, because I am an editor by trade. I work in editing, not fiction editing, which is my dream and my goal one day, but in like magazine editing and article editing. So I know how to frame a good sentence. I know grammar. I know all that stuff. It's just everything else that comes with it when you're working on a book. So I think from here on out, I'm going to start paying more attention to my writing and like what I do as a writer, because it's been so interesting to sit and look back on me as a writer and where I've come from. Like writing My Puppy Named Rudy, or writing Three Little Words, which was based off of Just Listen by Sarah Dessen, and coming to this place where I realize that I can write fantasy and I can write pretty good stories. And this is all to say, I love talking about this kind of stuff. If you couldn't tell by this probably really long and rambly video, that's besides the point. I would love to know down below if you guys have a moment where you realized, or you came to that ending with your very first draft that you actually finished. What was that moment for you when you realized that you could do this, you could be a writer because you finally did the thing and you wrote a damn book? I love that moment. It's wild to me because I was sitting on my couch alone. I just sat there with my computer and I was like, I don't know what to do now. I'm done. The wildest moment ever. But yeah, I would love to know your guys' thoughts about the evolution of writing as your own person. I would love to know your thoughts on plotting, pantsing, or plantsing, somewhere in the middle. But yeah, this was a really interesting video idea. So thank you guys for watching. And I hope that I, said something intelligent at some point in this. But yeah, I will also let you guys know when Amy's discussion with me is going to go live, because that'll be in the next couple of weeks. But I love talking about this kind of stuff. Also, if you guys ever want to know or hang out with me when I'm actually writing, I do writing sprints mostly every Saturday in like the afternoon, Central Standard Time, around 1:30, 2 every Saturday, almost every Saturday. So if you ever want to hang out, I'm here on YouTube, I'm live. Anyways, my lovely friends, thank you so much for hanging out with me for this rambly rant of a video about sort of story structure, sort of my writing evolution. But I will catch you in another video very, very soon. Stay kind and keep on writing.